and welcome. I'm Antonina Antosha, and you're watching UATV. We're broadcasting from Toronto, Canada, where the conference on Ukrainian reforms is currently underway. UATV, together with Agri Team Canada, is launching a series of special interviews dedicated to the progress that has been made during the reforms in Ukraine. Today, we're going to be talking about the penitentiary reform and probation in particular. And together in the studio with me right now is Tawnia Sanford Ammar. She's the Agri Team Canada Consulting County Director for Ukraine and EDGE Project Director. Hello, and thank you for joining, Tawnia.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, to give a little understanding to our audience what the reform is all about and what we're going to talk about, let's watch a little video clip.
Great.
Батьки випивали, помощі ніякої не було взагалі. Як уміла, так і жила. В 17 років вийшла заміж. Потім з'явилася в мене дитина, тільки самий старший, в 19 років. Потім через год Саша. В 99-му Вадим з'явився. Випивала, але за них не забувала поначалу.
Жінка не мала постійного місця проживання, вела невпорядкований спосіб життя. 3 старших синів віддала до інтернату.
Зоя жінка гарна, хороша, але на той час у неї була така слабка воля, і вона не могла самостійно справитися з залежністю, яка в неї на той час була.
Зоя завагітніла, їй підходив вже час народжувати, але житла придатного для проживання Зої разом з дитиною на той момент не було взагалі.
Відправили мене в центр матері і дитини, в Кременчуг.
Вони її навчили отримувати радість від материнства і зародили в неї те бажання змінити своє життя.
Ми об'єднали всі ресурси для допомоги цій сім'ї.
Балакали зі мною, просили мене, що можна ж степенитися. Я почала прислухатися і робити так, як вони мене просили. Ми і змінилися з чоловіком. Дитинка ходить в садочок, я працюю, даю корівок. Нарешті я почала жити.
Помилитися може кожен. Дуже важливо в цей момент простягнути руку допомоги та надати людині другий шанс, аби не зламати життя в'язницею. У 2017 році створено службу пробації. Основна її мета – об'єднати ресурси навколо людини, яка вступила в конфлікт із законом, аби допомогти їй подолати труднощі, які призвели до скоєння злочину. Ми мусимо разом допомогти такій людині, отримати освіту, влаштуватись на роботу, зберегти родину, навчити контролювати себе. Доведено, що особа, яка відчуває підтримку родини та суспільства, почувається корисною і не скоює злочини повторно. Змінюючи одне життя, ми змінюємо цілу країну.
So, Tawnia, probation is the alternative to prison, which is a relatively new initiative for Ukraine. What does it give to Ukrainians?
I think, as Deputy Minister Chernyshov just said, when we look at trying to change the life of one person, eventually we do change the lives of many Ukrainians in the country. Probation is really about changing the approach to penitentiary service. So when somebody comes into conflict with the law, it's really about trying to get that one individual person back on the right path, focusing on their rehabilitation rather than just punishing them. And that's a benefit to that individual person, but it's also a benefit to the country because, well, really, penitentiary services is about ensuring that the public is safe from criminality, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure that when that crimes are not committed, that the community is safe. And the best way to do that is to have effective programs. And what we know is that prison is not effective. It's very costly, but it's not effective at all.
Well, comparing to the probation system, is it cheaper to run the probation system instead of putting people in prison? And what kind of law offenders are falling under the category of getting on probation system instead of going to jail?
Well, actually, Ukraine's run a very luxurious system of prison if you want to compare numbers with other countries, because Ukraine has sent a lot of people to prison that really shouldn't be there. So there's a wide category of crimes for which you can go to prison in Ukraine, and that's a shame for a number of reasons. One of them is it's not cost effective. Ukraine has been sending people to prison for minor thefts, for medium gravity crimes, which doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of cost effectiveness. When you look at other jurisdictions, other countries, long ago they have tried to deal with those kinds of crimes outside of the formal criminal justice system. So there's a number of kinds of sanctions that you can keep them out of the court system and then keep them out of the prison system. So that's one aspect of it. But more broadly, prison is just incredibly expensive. It's about 10 times cheaper to keep somebody on probation than it is to keep them in prison. But probation is way more effective because the focus of probation is about rehabilitation, whereas prison, more or less, is just about punishment.
Okay, so if a person commits a minor law offense, let's say like shoplifting or something like that, what happens next? Instead of putting a person to jail, how does probation work?
So that's a very good example. That's the kind of example which in the past a person would just automatically receive a prison sentence. So when we started working in Ukraine, we were working primarily with juveniles, and what we understood is the most common crime was theft. In kids, teenagers, keep in mind, from the age of 16 to 18, were being sentenced for 4 years for theft. So, that's the entirety of their teenage lives for something, at times the value of this stuff was really, really minor. The example that comes to mind that I use quite often, because we did a study of kids who were incarcerated, and one child he was 14 when this happened, and he was incarcerated for stealing a wheelbarrow, a sheep, and a piece of rope.
Oh, wow.
And it seems like a bit of a joke, right? What was he doing?
Not to the child.
Yeah, 14. But it's not a joke because this kid was in prison for 4 years. So his entire teenage life for something that's of little value. When I read that particular file, I thought, okay, this has to be some sort of a joke, right? But it's not. I mean, this has had lifelong implications for him. He's lost 4 years in prison. And then, of course, the effects when he comes out, and in terms of future employment, schooling, and what that has done to him being institutionalized like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what would happen if he would go on probation?
So on probation, and luckily we do have probation passed in Ukraine now. The law was passed in 2015, and it's operational. Unfortunately, it's not operational. It is operational across the country, but it depends on where you live, whether a judge will sentence you to probation or will rely on the provisions of the criminal code, and you may still be at risk for going to prison. So this is something we still need to do a lot of work on in terms of educating judges and prosecutors about the effectiveness of probation. But to get to your question, if we're in a jurisdiction where probation is used widely, the judges understand it, this person would be sentenced to probation. He or she would then go to the probation center, meet with the probation officer. They would do an assessment. It's a little bit like going to a doctor and understanding how did you get in this situation. So a diagnostic, is there substance abuse involved? Is there some issues in terms of criminogenic thinking? This person sort of thinks that this is a normal way to behave. Does it have to do with maybe difficulties with employment, et cetera? So it's a really tailored, individualized approach. They come up with a case plan for this person, and then the probation officers work with that client over a period of usually 2 years, set goals for them.
This is a common time frame, 2 years, or is it set privately for every offender?
The time frame is set by the court, but and it's typically 2 years, but the number of interventions and the kind of interventions are determined by the individual probation officer. And again, it's a diagnostic. So the probation officer would work with that client and would say, we have assessment tools that we can understand if somebody is at high risk for reoffending or at a lower risk. And if they're at a lower risk. You don't want to do a huge amount with them. There has to be an appropriate kind of treatment for the issues that are going on with them. Just like, you don't treat a cold with chemotherapy drugs, right? And you treat cancer with the appropriate one. So it's the same when you're looking at rehabilitation. You want to make sure that you're treating it appropriately. So the probation officer will determine how often their client comes in to meet them, does the checkup. If there's substance abuse going on, they'll refer them to a substance abuse program. Maybe there's family issues, family counseling. Maybe there's emotional issues, anger management, or other kinds of specific programs that they can go through to tackle those individual issues that we know drive criminality.
What happens to the person after the 2 years time frame is over and the probation is over? What happens to the person?
So that after that 2-year sentence is over, that person is free to go, just like with any other sentence, just as if they were leaving prison. I think the big difference in this case is when somebody leaves a prison in Ukraine, there is absolutely no follow-up. And that's something that we're also working to change. When somebody leaves the probation program, we have had a probation officer work with them, prepare them, try to prevent future criminality with them already for 2 years. So they're much more prepared to go out into the world. And I think the statistics on recidivism or reoffending really back that up. So when we started in 2010, the recidivism rate was between 60 and 70%. So you come out of prison, there was a 60 to 70% chance you were going to reoffend. Yeah. The recidivism rate now is under 2%. It varies by jurisdiction.
That is a huge difference.
No, it's incredible. Yes. And it's a recidivism rate that you don't really see in any other country, which takes me back to one of the first points, is that Ukraine incarcerates far too many people for two minor crimes. These are not people who should be in prison to start with.
So probation officers seem like the key figures of the probation system. How are they going to be picked out? Because those are the people that the law offenders are going to be communicating constantly with. So how do we make sure that those people do not make it even worse?
So we've been working with them for a number of years since the probation, before the probation law was passed. Our project, implemented by Agri-Team and funded by Canada, was working on youth justice issues since 2010 in Ukraine. So this has not been a short reform, and I think there are very few short reforms. It takes a few years to make these monumental changes, but. What we have seen is we started to train those probation officers 2010, 2011. We learned the lessons from what was working, what wasn't working, where people needed additional assistance. And we've been working with the Penitentiary Service Academy. We've now instituted our training there. And so all probation officers in Ukraine have benefited from world-class international best practices. And so they really know what they're doing in terms of working with offenders.
What are the final goals? What is the final destination of the penitentiary system reform?
What we really want to do is really orient Ukraine on European values and ensure that the penitentiary service is focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. That's good for individual people, individual offenders, but it's also good for the country because it's more effective. And it's cheaper.
Less costly.
We end up having less criminality in the country, and that's what we really want to see at the end of the day, is public safety. But we need to care about those people who've committed the crimes. People don't commit the crimes, generally because it's a fun thing to do. There's a lot of reasons
for that.
There's many reasons that drive that. And as I said, our probation officers do an assessment of each client that comes into the system, and they use this internationally developed assessment system based on decades of research, which looks at criminogenic factors. And some of those factors I mentioned before, it's things like connection with family. We know, for example, that many of the offenders have come out of Ukraine's orphanage system. It's a huge problem.
Unfortunately, this is the common practice. Yes.
Yes. So, and the statistics for people coming out of orphanages are terrifying. I think that, I won't give you a number, but it's a very small percentage are successful in life, meaning that most of those kids that graduate from the orphanages end up dying within a few years. There's a lot of suicide, there's a lot of substance abuse, there's a lot of criminality. And when we look at the profiles of people who are incarcerated, a large percentage of them have come from institutions before. So, you know, we're institutionalizing children for all sorts of reasons. They grow up and they commit crimes and they're institutionalized again as adults.
Well, fortunately, we have a reform running that is going to change that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming to our studio tonight.
Thank you for having me.
That was Tawnia Sanford Ammar. She is Agri-Team Canada Consulting Country Director for Ukraine and EDGE Project Director. You're watching UATV. I'm Antonina Antosha. We're working from Toronto, Canada, where the Conference on Ukrainian Reforms is currently underway. Stay tuned for more.